Let's talk about something that many of us don't speak out loud, but we feel it, we live it. Someone breaks your heart. They betray your trust. They walk away like you never mattered. And just when you're rebuilding, just when you start breathing on your own again, they come back. There's something deeply human about craving comfort. We're wired for it. We seek it out when the world gets loud, when the pain gets sharp, when the silence gets too heavy. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Some people return to your life not because they want to make amends, not because they've changed, but because you feel safe. And safe feels familiar. Safe feels like home, even when it's a home they helped burn down. It's not that they suddenly woke up one day gripped with remorse and personal growth. That's the version we like to romanticize, especially if we're still healing. We want to believe that maybe their return is part of a larger story arc. Maybe they've realized what they lost. Maybe they're ready to finally show up the way we always hoped they would. But more often than not, they're not returning to take accountability. They're returning to escape the discomfort of their own choices. And what better place to run than the arms of someone who once made them feel seen, accepted, forgiven, even at their worst? Comfort in its shadow form becomes a way to avoid growth. When someone hurts you and disappears, they often leave you to carry the weight of the pain alone. And when they come back, what they're really asking is this: can you still be my soft place to land? Not, can I make this right? Not, how did I wound you? But rather, will you still let me feel good in your presence, even if I made you feel unworthy in mine? That's not accountability. That's emotional refuge without responsibility. It's crucial to understand that the absence of apology does not mean the absence of intention. When someone comes back without doing the work, without facing their behavior, without sitting in the discomfort of their own actions, they're not offering healing. They're seeking it. But they're seeking it from you instead of within themselves. And if you're not careful, you'll confuse that need for closeness with a willingness to change. You'll tell yourself, they must care, when the truth might be, they're just lonely and I'm easy to come home to. This is where our need for belonging becomes dangerous. So many of us are wired to nurture. We want to understand people. We see the good even in the people who broke us. And in that sacred, vulnerable place where empathy lives, we sometimes forget that empathy does not require access. You can hold space for someone's humanity and still hold a boundary. You can see their wounds and still refuse to let them wound you again. Because love without responsibility becomes manipulation in disguise. When someone returns to you without a clear reckoning of the harm they've caused, what they're asking is to be comforted, not to be held accountable. And here's the kicker. They often don't even realize it. They may think they're being brave by reaching out. They may believe their return is a gesture of growth. But growth without awareness is just repetition. And without awareness of how their behavior impacted you, any reunion is just a roundabout way back to the same pain. The real work, true, soul-deep accountability requires courage. It requires a willingness to sit in the shame of what you've done, not to avoid it by revisiting a person who made you feel better about yourself. So when they come back, before you open the door, ask yourself, are they here because they want to own their story or because they want to edit yours? Because if they're not willing to stand in the truth of who they were and how they hurt you, then they're not really coming back to you. They're coming back to the version of you who made them feel safe from themselves. And that version of you doesn't live here anymore. There's something deeply human about craving comfort. We're wired for it. We seek it out when the world gets loud, when the pain gets sharp, when the silence gets too heavy. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Some people return to your life not because they want to make amends, not because they've changed, but because you feel safe. And safe feels like home, even when it's a home they helped burn down. It's not that they suddenly woke up one day gripped with remorse and personal growth. That's the version we like to romanticize, especially if we're still healing. We want to believe that maybe their return is part of a larger story arc. Maybe they've realized what they lost. Maybe they're ready to finally show up the way we always hoped they would. But more often than not, they're not returning to take accountability. They're returning to escape the discomfort of their own choices. And what better place to run than the arms of someone who once made them feel seen, accepted, forgiven, even at their worst. Comfort in its shadow form becomes a way to avoid growth. When someone hurts you and disappears, they often leave you to carry the weight of the pain alone. And when they come back, what they're really asking is this: can you still be my soft place to land? Not, can I make this right? Not, how did I wound you? But rather, will you still let me feel good in your presence, even if I made you feel unworthy in mine? That's not accountability. That's emotional refuge without responsibility. It's crucial to understand that the absence of apology does not mean the absence of intention. When someone comes back without doing the work, without facing their behavior, without sitting in the discomfort of their own actions, they're not offering healing. They're seeking it. But they're seeking it from you instead of within themselves. And if you're not careful, you'll confuse that need for closeness with a willingness to change. You'll tell yourself they must care, when the truth might be, they're just lonely and I'm easy to come home to. This is where our need for belonging becomes dangerous. So many of us are wired to nurture. We want to understand people. We see the good even in the people who broke us. And in that sacred, vulnerable place where empathy lives, we sometimes forget that empathy does not require access. You can hold space for someone's humanity and still hold a boundary. You can see their wounds and still refuse to let them wound you again. Because love without responsibility becomes manipulation in disguise. When someone returns to you without a clear reckoning of the harm they've caused, what they're asking is to be comforted, not to be held accountable. And here's the kicker: they often don't even realize it. They may think they're being brave by reaching out. They may believe their return is a gesture of growth. But growth without awareness is just repetition. And without awareness of how their behavior impacted you, any reunion is just a roundabout way back to the same pain. The real work, true, soul-deep accountability requires courage. It requires a willingness to sit in the shame of what you've done, not to avoid it by revisiting a person who made you feel better about yourself. So when they come back, before you open the door, ask yourself, are they here because they want to own their story or because they want to edit yours? Because if they're not willing to stand in the truth of who they were and how they hurt you, then they're not really coming back to you. They're coming back to the version of you who made them feel safe from themselves. And that version of you doesn't live here anymore. Healing has a quiet power. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't kick down doors or demand to be seen. It starts small, like sleeping through the night again without checking your phone, like eating a full meal without that hollow ache in your chest, like laughing at something and realizing it wasn't forced. Healing is subtle, but it's magnetic. And when it begins to show on the surface, people notice, even the ones who never expected to see you shine again. Here's the irony that stings. The person who once hurt you often returns when they start to see you glow. when your light starts flickering back on, when your voice sounds different, stronger, clearer, no longer cracked from crying. And that shift, it unsettles them, because the version of you that accepted their excuses is disappearing. The version of you who bent, who shrank, who waited is being replaced by someone rooted in self-respect. That's what draws them back, not because they've done the inner work, not because they faced their shadow, but because you have. We often confuse the return of someone who hurt us as a sign of their personal growth. They must have changed, we whisper to ourselves. Why else would they come back? But here's the hard truth. People don't always return out of transformation. Sometimes they return out of discomfort. They feel your distance. They sense the shift, and the loss of control masquerades as longing. What they miss isn't just you. It's the version of you who tolerated the imbalance. This is why healing has to be for you, not for the hope that it will invite them back better. Because when someone returns to the scene of the damage without acknowledging the impact they had, they're not coming to rebuild. They're coming to reclaim. And your peace, your progress, your wholeness, those things begin to look like something they want again, something they think they're entitled to, simply because they once had access. But healing teaches us this vital lesson. Access is not a lifetime pass. There's a moment, and it's often quiet, where you realize their presence no longer feels like a lifeline. That's the moment they tend to reach out, not because they felt that moment too, but because they felt the absence of control, the shift in energy, the boundary taking root. People can feel when they no longer live rent-free in your mind. And for someone who relied on your emotional labor, your silence can be louder than your words. Your healing unsettles the parts of them that still refuse to evolve. Don't romanticize their timing. That's the trap. We tell ourselves, maybe they came back because they see my worth now. And maybe that's partly true. But seeing your worth and honoring it are two different things. One can be driven by desire. The other demands discipline, humility, and repair. And if they haven't shown up with those things, if they haven't led with accountability, vulnerability, and a genuine desire to understand the pain they caused, then they're not responding to you. They're responding to the way you make them feel now that you've healed. The person you are becoming isn't a reward for someone who walked away from your pain. Let that truth sit heavy in your chest if it needs to. Because your healing isn't a beacon for them to find their way back. It's a boundary to remind you that not everyone deserves a second entrance into your sacred space. Sometimes your glow is not an invitation. It's a reminder to you of how far you've come and why going backward is no longer an option. There's something deeply ingrained in so many of us, especially those of us who were taught that love means sacrifice or that care means fixing, that makes us want to carry people. We see someone hurting, someone lost, someone standing in the consequences of their own choices, and our instinct is to reach out, to soften it, to help them make sense of it. And sometimes, without realizing it, we end up dragging their entire emotional weight across a terrain that wasn't meant for us to walk. It happens slowly. You start explaining their behavior to your friends. You start rationalizing their silence, their mood swings, their inability to show up. You tell yourself they've been through so much, and you believe that love means understanding them better than they understand themselves. But here's the truth that will set you free. You are not their savior, you are not their therapist, and you are not their rehabilitation center. You are a whole human being with your own wounds to heal, and no one else's journey is your responsibility to complete. When someone returns after hurting you, it's tempting to see their reappearance as a second chance to get it right, not just for them, but for you. Maybe this time you'll say it better. Maybe this time they'll hear you differently. Maybe now you can teach them how to love you. But that's not a relationship, that's a curriculum. And unless they choose to enroll in their own growth, you'll always be the one doing the work while they benefit from your emotional labor. Responsibility without reciprocity turns into resentment. Every time you pick up the pieces for someone who refuses to learn how to hold them, you lose pieces of yourself. You begin to internalize their brokenness as your burden. And what was once compassion becomes codependency dressed up as care. True love doesn't ask you to abandon yourself so someone else can stay comfortable. It doesn't guilt you into being their life raft while they refuse to learn how to swim. We have to stop confusing empathy with obligation. You can see someone's pain. You can even understand it deeply without assigning yourself the role of healer. Let's be honest. The urge to fix, to carry, to explain often comes from our own discomfort with watching someone sit in their consequences. But part of healthy love, and especially healthy self-love, is letting people feel the full weight of their choices, not out of punishment, but out of respect, because you can't grow what you won't own. If someone hurts you and returns without having done their own work, it is not your job to teach them who they hurt you as. That's their journey. That's their climb. And as hard as it is, especially for those of us who love deeply and feel everything in the marrow of our bones, we have to step back and remember it's not selfish to let someone face their own path. It's sacred. Holding space is not the same as holding them together. When you stop over-functioning in someone else's emotional life, something powerful happens. You start reclaiming energy. You start hearing your own voice again. And you begin to understand that love is not about carrying people on your back. It's about walking side by side with both people doing their own inner work. When someone comes back and they haven't done that work, let them walk their path. You've got your own road to protect now. Forgiveness is one of the most misunderstood concepts in the emotional world. We've been taught, especially those of us raised to prioritize peace over honesty, that forgiveness means reconciliation, that it's a return to what was, that if you truly forgive someone, you welcome them back with open arms. But that's not forgiveness. That's forgetting. That's self-abandonment, dressed in spiritual language. Real forgiveness doesn't demand proximity. It demands presence with yourself, with your pain, with your healing. And sometimes that healing requires distance. Forgiveness is for you. It's an inside job. It's the courageous act of saying, I'm not going to carry this anger every day anymore. I'm not going to let this pain write my story. It's not about excusing what happened. It's about freeing yourself from the emotional chokehold of what happened. You can forgive someone in the quiet of your own mind. You can forgive them while keeping every boundary intact. You can forgive them and never let them back into your life. And that forgiveness is still valid, still complete, still deeply powerful. Reconnection, though, that's something else entirely. Reconnection is not owed. It's not automatic. It's a mutual decision that requires vulnerability on both sides. It requires hard conversations, deep accountability, and the willingness to sit in discomfort. You can't reconnect with someone who refuses to acknowledge what broke in the first place. You can't build a bridge with someone who's still denying there was ever a fire. Forgiveness is grace. Reconnection is work. And both need to be chosen, not assumed. One of the most painful dynamics I see, especially in tender-hearted people, is the pressure to reconcile just to prove they're not holding a grudge. But here's the truth. Holding boundaries doesn't mean you're bitter. It means you've learned. It means you've decided not to confuse pain with purpose or nostalgia with trust. Letting someone back into your life just to prove you're above it is not spiritual, it's self-betrayal. Forgiveness is not a test of your character, it's a celebration of your freedom. And freedom doesn't always include reunion. People will often say things like, if you really forgave me, you'd talk to me. But that's emotional manipulation. Forgiveness isn't about proving anything to the other person. It's about creating peace in your own soul. And here's the thing. Sometimes that peace requires silence. Sometimes it requires space. Sometimes it looks like wishing someone well and never opening the door again. That isn't cruelty, that's clarity. Forgiveness is a private revolution. It happens in your heart, not in a handshake. And let's not confuse the two. Someone coming back into your life isn't automatically an opportunity for reconnection. Just because they miss you doesn't mean they've earned you. Just because they regret what they did doesn't mean they're ready to show up differently. Reconnection means both people are showing up with honesty, with humility, and with a willingness to do the hard work of trust building. That can't be one-sided. It can't be driven by guilt or nostalgia or fear of loneliness. Reconnection without repair is just repetition with better packaging. So if you've done the hard work of forgiving someone in your heart, but you don't feel safe letting them back in, you're not broken, you're wise. You're not cold, you're clear. You've learned that healing isn't about pretending things never happened. It's about honoring what did and making different choices because of it. You don't have to explain your boundaries to anyone who didn't help you build them. You've done the work. You've found your peace. And you get to decide who has access to it. When someone who hurt you comes back, it can feel like a test. Your heart starts racing. Old patterns flare up. You wonder if this is the universe checking your growth, asking, did you really learn your lesson? Did you really heal? But that framing is a trap. It puts the power back in their hands. It suggests that your progress can only be proven by how gracefully you receive them. But here's what I know to be true. Their return isn't your test. It's your confirmation. It's the universe showing you how far you've come, not asking you to go back. The moment they reach out again, whether through a text, a like on social media, or a carefully worded message that sounds like an apology but still centers them, it's not a moment to question your healing. It's a moment to see your strength reflected. You're no longer where you were. You don't feel cracked open by the sight of their name. You might feel something, yes, nostalgia, grief, even a flicker of hope, but that doesn't mean you're failing. That means you're human, and being human doesn't make you weak. It means you feel deeply and still choose wisely. See, when we're still healing, we confuse emotional reaction with emotional regression. But just because your heart stirs doesn't mean you've gone backward. It just means that part of your story is being touched again. The difference is now you get to choose what happens next. Before, their presence may have dictated your response. Now your self-respect does. That shift, that's your confirmation. That's your proof that the healing you've done isn't just intellectual, it's embodied. It's easy to slip into the narrative that we're being tested, especially if you grew up believing love has to be earned through sacrifice, or that people leaving is your fault or that reconciliation is the finish line of growth. But what if it's not a test? What if it's a mirror? What if the very fact that you're not desperate to fix it, that you're not racing to open the door, means that you've already passed every version of that test long ago? The return of someone who once had power over you is not an exam. It's a moment of clarity. There's something holy about realizing you don't owe access to someone just because they remember who you were. They may say things like, "You feel different," or "You've changed." And they're right, you have changed. You're not shrinking anymore. You're not making excuses for behavior that exhausted you. You're not craving closure from someone who couldn't offer clarity when it mattered. And that shift, that's intimidating for someone who once depended on your uncertainty. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for the other person is to let that chapter stay closed. Not with bitterness, not with cruelty, but with a calm, grounded knowing. I'm not who I was when you hurt me, and I don't have to reopen the door to prove it. That quiet knowing is your confirmation. It doesn't scream. It doesn't try to prove its growth. It simply exists, rooted, calm, steady. And that energy, that's what changes your life. So when they come back and you feel that familiar tug, don't ask, "Am I being tested?" Instead, pause, breathe, and ask, "What is this showing me about the version of me that stands here today?" Because if you look closely, you'll see it. This moment isn't asking you to go backward. It's offering you a chance to honor how far you've already come. And that, my friend, is not a test. That's a triumph. There's a haunting familiarity when someone who hurt you finds their way back. They know just what to say. They remember how to make their way through your softness. They speak your old language, tapping into memories and emotions they helped create, and in some cases, helped destroy. But here's the truth that will free you. Just because someone remembers how to get to your heart doesn't mean they belong there anymore. Familiarity is not a reason to offer access. Remembrance is not the same as readiness. We often mistake someone's return for emotional evolution. They show up saying things like, "I've been thinking about you," or "I miss how things used to be." And suddenly a door creaks open in us, a door we fought so hard to close. Because when someone who once mattered starts knocking again, our old wiring lights up. The past versions of us, the ones who waited, who longed, who gave chance after chance, begin to whisper, "What if they mean it this time?" But healing reminds you, a memory is not a map. It doesn't show you where you're going. It only shows you where you've been. The person you had to become after the hurt, the strength you built, the clarity you earned, all of that was sacred work. It didn't happen overnight. It came through the tears you didn't show, the late nights you spent questioning your worth, the moments you chose silence over begging. And now that you've arrived in a space where peace feels possible, someone from your past showing up doesn't mean you owe them a return ticket. They don't get to bypass the cost of your healing just because they were once a part of your story. Boundaries aren't punishments, they're clarity in action. They're your way of saying, "I love myself enough to protect what I rebuilt." And yes, even if the person at your door is apologetic, even if they seem different, even if they tell you everything you once longed to hear, you still don't have to let them in. Why? Because a changed tone doesn't always mean changed behavior. And you've done too much work to gamble your peace on the potential of someone else's transformation. It's okay to acknowledge the part of you that still wants to open the door. That's not weakness. That's humanity. Of course you want to believe in second chances. Of course you want to believe that people can grow. But belief in growth doesn't require you to be the testing ground. Let them prove their growth without the intimacy of your space. Let them heal without the shortcut of your forgiveness. You are not required to serve as their evidence of change. Your healing doesn't need to be disrupted so theirs can begin. Sometimes love means letting people go where they can learn on their own. Sometimes it means saying, I believe you're trying, without reopening the part of your life that their absence made room to heal. The thing is, they may genuinely remember where you live, emotionally, spiritually, even physically. But you are no longer standing in the same place. You've moved, you've grown, and the door they're knocking on, that door now has a lock, a boundary, and a version of you that understands access has to be earned, not simply remembered. So when they come back, because sometimes they do, and your heart stirs, your chest tightens, your mind spirals with what ifs, take a breath. Come home to yourself. Remind yourself that you're allowed to love someone and still say no. You're allowed to forgive someone and still not open the door again. Because safety, peace, and integrity are not gifts you owe anyone. They are your birthright. And now that you've claimed them, you have every right to protect them. Here's what I want you to remember. People will come back, not always because they've changed, but because you have. You've done the work. You've faced the pain, sat in the silence, stood in the fire of your own healing, and now your light looks like a safe place again. But not everyone who sees your light deserves a seat at your table. Some came only to taste your softness, not to protect it. Some came to be comforted, not to be accountable. You are not cold for protecting your peace. You are not heartless for saying no to someone who once felt like home. You are not bitter for recognizing patterns and refusing to repeat them. That's not bitterness. That's clarity. That's growth. That's self-respect in motion. Healing doesn't mean you go back to what broke you. It means you choose differently. Even when it's hard, even when it's lonely, even when a part of you still loves them. Choosing yourself after being hurt isn't selfish, it's sacred. And you don't owe anyone access just because they've suddenly remembered your worth. Let them come back. Let them say their words. Let them feel what they feel. But let you be the one who decides what stays and what no longer fits. Because this isn't about whether they've changed. It's about whether you're still willing to make yourself small so they can feel big. You don't live there anymore, and you're allowed to close the door with grace, with strength, and with the quiet, grounded power of a person who finally understands that peace is not something we wait for. It's something we protect.